Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Kier, and with me as always is my co-host Austin Davidson. Before we get started real quick, we both wanted to give a little shout out to Des Bryant. We're not sure if everyone knows or not, but his dad passed away Saturday evening before the game on Sunday, and it was a nice effort for him. Given everything that happened, so we wanted to send our condolences to him, and all the heart in the world for him. That was quite a performance for him. But anyway, going back to the game on Sunday, the Cowboys defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers 35-30 in Heinz Field. The Cowboys now move to 8-1 and have the best record in the NFC now, while the Steelers fall to 4-5 and are now a game and a half out of the division lead. If you want to include the Ravens win being the tiebreaker, the Ravens are 5-4 after they beat the Cleveland Browns on Thursday night, which is actually the Steelers' next opponent. The Steelers will be traveling to Cleveland next Sunday to take on the 0-10 Cleveland Browns. This was a heartbreaking loss, to say the least, and this loss has since been amplified by the news of Cameron Hayward's injury. Just the other day, news broke that Cameron Hayward is going to be out for the rest of the season with a torn pectoral muscle. This is a crushing blow to a defense that has already been suspect and is now going to have to continue for the rest of the season without its best player. Going through the rest of the injury report, Steven Johnson broke his ankle and was placed on injured reserve, so the team re-signed L.J. Fort, who probably couldn't have gotten far from Pittsburgh after he was off the team for 5 days. That was pretty much the injury news from that game. Other injured players include Darius Hayward-Bay, was already ruled out for this upcoming game. Marcus Wheaton is having his shoulder reevaluated to see if he can be able to return this season or if he's going to have to go under the knife. D'Angelo Williams with a knee and Jordan Dangerfield with his groin are still working their way back. And it became known this week, too, that Sammy Coates has not been playing as much due to injury. We already knew about one finger that he was having trouble with, but it's now known that he has 2 broken fingers. So that explains why he hasn't been playing on offense, yet still only playing on special teams. I'm sorry, I forgot about Shamarko Thomas, too. He re-injured his groin during the game on Sunday as well. So the Steelers are still a banged-up group, as many teams are going forward. But looking back at this last game, as I said, it was a heartbreaking loss that many reporters have said it was the lowest that locker room has seemed to feel after a regular season game at Heinz Field. Judging by the score, the offense played well pretty much for the most part. They did what they had to do and it mattered. They had a few struggles with their secondary receivers and run blocking, but generally speaking, they got the job done. The defense struggled, however, and it was evident by the end of the game that they were tired and they were just physically being overpowered. All right, so this game was as I said before, a difficult loss for the Steelers. It was in a season full of a lot of poor football being played. This was probably the best game played. If you were a fan of either team or even just a casual fan watching, there was a good chance you were glued to the TV for every play. Back and forth action, as I said, the Steelers had most of the early portion of the game when it comes to the first quarter. The Cowboys had a turnover on their first possession that the Steelers then turned into points. The Steelers led 12-3, actually, but then the Cowboys, who hadn't been doing much offensively, got a nice 83-yard screen pass from Ezekiel Elliott. Theme of the day with the Steelers struggling on defense. Elliott moved swiftly through the field and was able to score. The back-and-forth affair continued with 7 total lead changes and both teams putting up over 420 total yards of offense. The time of possession was pretty even as the Cowboys won it with 30 minutes and 24 seconds, but on the whole, this was one of the more competitive games this season. Both teams had plenty of chances to win, the Cowboys scoring twice in the final 10 minutes. The Steelers coming back in between those two drives to take the lead themselves, and then with 42 seconds left and all three of their timeouts remaining, the Cowboys were able to move down the field. And right before it looked like they were going to take a field goal, make a quick running play to get their kicker set up in a nice position for what could have been the winning field goal, the Steelers' defense just ultimately collapsed, and Ezekiel Elliott was able to run 30 yards for what ended up being the winning score. So definitely a tough one for the Steelers today, but there are some positives even in this unfortunate game for the Steelers. Looking back at the way the offense played, they played really well. Starting it all with the offenses, as always, Ben Roethlisberger. And unlike last week where he struggled to get in rhythm and he clearly was not himself, this week he's actually one of my winners. He was rarely missing on any of his throws, and obviously the highlight of his performance was his 3 touchdowns, including his final one to Antonio Brown, which was the patented Dan Marino fake spike play. On the whole, Ben Roethlisberger finished with only 9 incompletions, finishing 37-46 for 408 yards and 3 TDs. He was only sacked once and averaged 8.9 yards per attempt. My other winner is Eli Rogers, which might be a little surprising given the fact that he only had 4 receptions, but he did have his second touchdown of the year, as I said earlier, and he had the key play on the Steelers' second scoring drive on a play where the Steelers' Ben Roethlisberger was able to draw the Cowboys off sides, and then Rodgers made a deep catch over the middle for 22 yards. I thought he played really well, even though his stats didn't pop out at you, but I was impressed with his play. And as far as the losers go, it's tough to find losers per se in an offense that puts up 30 points and has over 400 passing yards alone. But I'm going to say a loser today was Ladarius Green. My apologies. He wasn't necessarily bad by any stretch, but I was hoping to see a little bit more out of him. He only played a few snaps, and he ended up dropping. True, this was a tough play. He dropped a 2-point conversion, but I was hoping to see him play a little more because he seemed healthy. It didn't seem like it was too much for him, so I was just hoping to see a little more from him. The other loser I have on offense is Antonio Brown, and this might be surprising to a lot of people, but I remember I was talking to you, Austin, about how frustrating this was. On the last play of the game, Antonio Brown is thrown a ball on what is normally a hook and ladder situation when they're too far from the end zone to attempt a Hail Mary, and he keeps running forward, but instead of lateraling it back, he just runs out of bounds, and that's a huge problem with me. I feel like he's accepting defeat there, and I know I'm nitpicking a little bit, but he's got to be able to do a little bit something. Like, what's the point of that play if you're just going to run right out of bounds? So overall, it was a good day for the offense. I'll get to the positional grades quickly. I gave the Ben Roethlisberger an A. As I said, only 9 incompletions, over 400 yards on the day, no turnovers, 1 sack, and 3 touchdowns. It was another great game for Roethlisberger, and it's strange. He's had 4 games where his passer rating's been under 79, and 4 where they've been over 112. So he's either played great or terribly. So hoping for more of the better games coming up here. At running back, I gave this Le'Veon Bell a B+. He scored both through the air and on the ground for his first touchdowns of the year. But most of his success came early in the game on the ground. The holes that were there in the first half were not in the second half, as Ezekiel Elliott, his counterpart, seemingly wasn't getting touched until he passed at least 3 yards of grass. But Bell, on the other hand, it felt like he was getting touched before he reached the line of scrimmage, and he was getting a lot of hard-earned yards. I gave the receivers a B. I would have given it a B+ if it weren't for what I consider Antonio Brown's questionable decision at the end of the game. I said earlier that the supporting cast at receiver was okay. The aforementioned Eli Rogers with a nice touchdown and a few nice plays, but Kobe Hamilton had a nice catch and drew a pass interference, but I was hoping for a little more from them too. Just wasn't as impactful as I was hoping. The tight ends I also gave a B. I thought they were much better in the passing game this week. All 4 of them, including Ladarius Green, caught passes. but they struggled in the blocking game, as has been the theme with them all year, and I don't expect that to really get better this year. And then finally, the offensive line, I gave a B minus. For pass protection, I would have given them an A, but I really didn't like the way they were blocking at the end of the game, and I just felt like the Steelers struggling to run in the second half really hurt their chances when it came to time of possession, and that ultimately led to the Cowboys wearing down the Steelers' defense in the end. So all in all, it was a pretty good day offensively, but obviously it wasn't good enough to overcome their defensive struggles. Which, Austin, you had the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you want to look at it, of analyzing the Steelers' defensive performance on Sunday. What do you have to say about it?
Oh yeah, I do. I was hesitant to even pick a winner, but I'm gonna pick two. I'm going to pick one for the first half because I think he does deserve to get talked about. But let me pick the one for overall first. I chose Anthony Chiquilo, who forced a fumble on the third play of the game, which led to a Steelers touchdown. He also had 4 tackles, including one for a loss. But besides that, the only other winner, and it's only for the first half, is Ross Cockrell. Ross Cockrell had a really good first half of football. He was in coverage, doing well, doing great. But all right, everyone else on the defense is a loser. So I could just go through every single person, but I'm just going to go straight into the positional grades. For defensive linemen, I gave them a D-. The only reason they don't fail is because Tuitt recorded a sack. Otherwise, the group all in all was lackluster. They allowed Ezekiel Elliott 5.4 yards per rush with only 1 tackle for a loss between Tuitt, Hargrave, Hayward, and McCullers. Of course, Hayward was apparently playing through an injury, so his play was probably that lower than his standard, but still, it was just poor play overall. And they allowed Elliott to go untouched for a walk-off touchdown at the end of the game. Moving on to linebackers, they get a C-. They get a slightly better grade, but probably a little too high for them. But Shazier offered pressure on the third play again, which allowed Chiquilo to get in there and get a strip sack on Dak Prescott. Also, Tuitt was credited with one of the 2 sacks, but on that sack, it was really James Harrison who helped get Dak down, but you won't see that in the stats. So I gave James Harrison some points for that. Still, they struggled in the pass defense, and they had inability to keep Ezekiel contained. They also contributed to allowing Elliott to be untouched on the Cowboys' last offensive play of the game. Now for DBs, my favorite, the only and first time that the positional group fails. They got an F. Awful play. They took us out of this game. On Zeke's 83-yard touchdown, Mike Mitchell missed yet another key tackle, allowing Zeke to just keep going, just like he did on the 95-yard touchdown to Mike Wallace. Tackling needs to get better between these DBs. We drafted a DB who's raw, who can't tackle already. We need the veterans to at least be able to tackle. Now, moving on, Artie Burns gave up a huge 50-yard touchdown to Dez Bryant. Then, from there, Ross Cockrell got an unnecessary roughness call on the Cowboys. Oh, my God. I am so sorry. On the Cowboys' last drive of the game, Sean Davis got a face mask, which allowed them to get into field goal range. And it was right after the Steelers got lucky, the refs missed the call on William Gay for the same exact thing. William Gay had already had a penalty on the day on Dez Bryant. With 42 seconds left, the DBs threw this game away. They allowed Zeke to rush in that touchdown indirectly. Of course, the linebackers and the defensive line were really behind that, but they shouldn't have been in that position to have to stop him anyway. The DBs really threw it away, and that's all I have to say about the defense.
All right. Well, now that we're done venting, I wanted to bring up a few extra points before we finished up here. Just talking a little bit about Cameron Hayward and the Stephon Tuitt and how the Steelers use their defensive linemen. I noticed that for most of this game, I don't know how many snaps it was, but it felt like Hayward and Tuitt were out there almost all the time. And I know that they are good players, but if you look around the league, guys like Aaron Donald or when J.J. Watt was healthy, it's rare that those guys played more than, 75% of the snaps. you got Hayward and Tua going back to last year, playing almost 90% of the snaps, and I just, it makes me wonder because of how bad the depth was at that position last year. It was supposedly better this year, but I don't know. I guess it isn't. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's good. We kept Tuitt out there for 100% of plays. If I remember the stat correctly, he was out there for 142 straight plays between last game and this game. We don't have any depth. Like, Javon Hargrave, let's talk about disappointments. Javon Hargrave was supposed to be he was impressing in the preseason. He was impressing in practice before the season started. He was supposed to be doing more than what he's doing now. I wouldn't say he's doing awfully. He's doing, like, less than decent, but I wouldn't say he's completely awful. But it's just been a disappointment. Stephon Tuitt was also supposed to have a breakout year. This was supposed to be the year he was crazy good. He was supposed to start showing like he was a leader like Cameron Hayward. And then Cameron Hayward is supposed to just keep doing him, but it's not his fault he fell off because of injury. But it's just really sad how this defensive line has developed this year. It has been disappointing, and there's no depth whatsoever.
I was thinking guys like L.T. Walton, the 6th-round pick from last year, Daniel McCullers, who I thought was originally supposed to be the starter before Hargrave took his spot, and guys like Ricardo Matthews. We were told they were supposed to be better than guys like Cam Thomas last year, but apparently they aren't because these guys are still playing 90% of the plays. I do think that playing that much has impacted the way Hayward got hurt. I think it probably does, and on top of that, I think it has a lot to do with why the Cowboys were getting so much chunks on the ground, especially at the end of the game. You have to think guys like Hayward, Tuitt, and Hargrave, guys who have been out there all game long, they don't usually do those kinds of things. They had to have been gassed, and usually teams like, I remember the Cowboys played at least 6 defensive linemen in rotations almost like the entire game. So when you're talking about teams that are rotating, keeping their guys fresh, yeah, they might not be as good as the starters, but are they that bad that they can't even play more than 10% of the snaps? I mean, you're hurting the team. I don't know. It's frustrating, and it's concerning now with Hayward out.
Yeah, it really is. We're just poor coaching has been a problem for the Steelers for a few weeks now, and I wouldn't blame it all on the coaches because obviously there's players play. But as you said, it doesn't make sense to not do rotation. Like they're NFL players. They should at least be decent enough to be able to play. You can't have the stars out there for 90% of the snaps because then they lose their ability to make plays. Like they aren't as good when they're tired. We needed people like McCullers to step up and Walton, but it's just not happening. I mean, maybe after this week, since now we lost Hayward, we will be seeing more of them. Maybe they'll start using 2 nose tackles for a little bit. Maybe just try it out, put Hargrave out there with McCullers or something. But it's been really sad. It really has.
Absolutely. I don't know if you saw this, but just before we got started here, I saw that James Harrison has been named the starter at right outside linebacker, so Jarvis Jones is now officially the backup, which I know you're probably happy about, and to be fair, I'm kind of a Jarvis Jones supporter. I mean, I never thought, he's not a pass rusher by any means. He's not nearly as good as any of us thought he was going to be, but I always thought he was a decent run player against the run. When it comes to rushing the passer, I believe James Harrison is actually now the Steelers' all-time leader in sacks, so I might be wrong.
He got it taken away from him because Stephon Tuitt technically got that sack that he got in on.
They didn't split that up?
No, they gave it all to Stephon Tuitt because he grabbed the leg.
All right, one more thing I wanted to touch upon is the fact that the Steelers have blitzed a lot more over the last 2 weeks, and it's been somewhat effective, but you've seen the byproducts. Guys like Artie Burns are getting shelled by Des Bryant. I wanted to get your opinion on whether you like the blitzing and potentially getting burned on the back end, or do you like what the Steelers were doing in the beginning of the year where they were giving up the play underneath and it seemed like the death by 1,000 cuts thing. What do you prefer and why?
I prefer the blitzing. See, when you have the people getting burnt, it happens once, like, every 30 plays. It doesn't happen very often. Like, they have to be looking for the right person. They have to realize the blitz is coming, which, I mean, a good quarterback will, but it's more exciting that way, for one, watching the blitz, because it's gotten us more sacks over the past 2 weeks that we started really doing it. Also, the one play that we got burnt in between these 2 weeks was only the Des Bryant play for 50 yards. But last week against the Ravens, the 95-yard touchdown wasn't on the blitz. It was on the poor tackling. So we've only given up one big play on the blitz. I prefer that way. I'd rather watch that than a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's better.
I'm in complete agreement with you on this issue. I think that in order to run the soft underneath coverage and not bringing many blitzers, I think that is reliant on having a strong 4-man pass rush, which we don't need to talk about how bad the Steelers' pass rush has been. If you can get a rush with 4 people, go ahead. Why bring the rush when you can get the same kind of pressure with only 4 people? But when it comes down to not being able to get pressure with that kind of defense, you need to get negative plays because you're not going to be able to get off the field if the quarterback has all day to throw. So when it comes down to that, you're just going to have to force the issue, in my opinion at least, and try to get negative plays. Sure, you're going to get burned, but if you look back at several Super Bowl teams or teams that have made appearances, and even one that's won, like the 2008 Cardinals and 2009 Saints, they didn't have amazing defenses. They relied on being able to take the ball away and getting sacks, making big plays when they needed to. And obviously this group isn't very talented. They're going to have to win based on making big plays. And a group that is going to need to make big plays soon is the safety position. And we can get into that more on Saturday. But is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
Nope, I'm ready to sign off.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us today. It was a frustrating episode and a frustrating game, to say the least. Hopefully we can refocus our attention with our good old pals, the Cleveland Browns, this week. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at capital STSP and then lowercase podcast. No double P, just capital P on the podcast. 1. We have a Facebook page, Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Email us, strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. We hope to have this episode up on SoundCloud and YouTube soon. Have a great day, everybody. Go Steelers.